Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate having this opportunity. And I know we've had a lot of acknowledgments tonight, but I just have a few of my own. First of all, I really want to acknowledge the staff at the Hunter Museum. I especially thank Nandini Makrandi and Lauren Nye for organizing this exhibition and the many, many Zoom meetings we had. To John Newman, John Reed, and Hannah Wimberly Lowe for their help during the installation because it was really all hands on deck. I also acknowledge Adira Causey, who made it possible, organized for me to be here tonight. And I know that Martha also helped in that. And finally, I also want to recognize First Horizon Foundation as a sponsor for this exhibition because it's really meaningful when you're able to get work out there in the world. It's meaningful to the world and it's meaningful to me. So I appreciate your support. And so we begin. And I want to tell you first that I love the water. I love oceans. I love lakes. I love rivers. When we go on vacation, I am focused on what body of water is nearby. And I think partly it's because I'm a Pisces. So I am, astrologically speaking, actually a fish. But I'm also deeply interested in what's going on underneath the waves. Underneath this boater, which is just out here, is an entirely different universe. There are mysterious creatures. There are paddlefish in there, y'all. There are paddlefish in there. And that's the first time I saw one, I was like, what is that? But much of my current work utilizes printmaking techniques to address that universe, and specifically to address marine bioinvaders on a global scale. Marine bioinvaders are organisms that have spread beyond their natural range in the aquatic environment. This piece features Littorina littorea. It's the periwinkle snail. And this ravenous little creature consumes algae and plankton off submerged rocks using this little beak-like structure called a radula. And you can see the snail featured here in red, and you can see those little circles on the inside. And hang on to that for a minute. In the background is the algae that it eats, along with, it does eat some zooplankton as well. And so there's a little barnacle nauplii on the upper left. These creatures are spread by ballast water. They live about 5 to 10 years each, and each female can lay 10,000 to 100,000 eggs every year. So that's what those little circles are. It's really important to note that non-native does not necessarily equal invasive. So for an organism to be recognized as invasive, it must do some sort of harm. I want to call your attention to two creatures in this. One that looks a lot like my son. The Latin name is Calebus joneseus. In front of him is Pterois volatan, which is the lionfish. And the lionfish, a lot like Calebus joneseus, they eat anything they can. The problem is that the native species, including small fish that we like to eat, like baby snapper and grouper, don't recognize these as the voracious predators they are. Lionfish have successfully invaded the coastal waters of the Atlantic in less than a decade. They have an astounding effect on the food web. When they invaded the Bahamas, prey fish biomass fell by 65 to 95%. And one of the weirder things I did spot in my research, and it's something worth Googling sometime, is a bunch of divers that actually tried to train sharks to eat these things. So they would spear them and then would wave them around and then the sharks would come eat them. Go check that out sometime. It seemed like an exceptionally bad idea to me, but there you have it. Scientific research into invasive species is at the heart of my current work, and my work combines art and science, both of which attempt to explain the world around us. Both fields are highly investigatory. One thing leads to another, which leads to another. In the studio, as in the lab, there is both a hypothesis and a conclusion. Artists and scientists both engage in intense observation of phenomenon, things, and events. Here you see me studying a creature called Victorella pavida in the Marine Bioinvasions Lab at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. Victorella is a really interesting creature. It's a bryozoan that forms these thick, hairy mats on objects, and you can see it there on the right. And this provides habitat for all sorts of other creatures. So while I was looking at Victorella through the microscope, and it was in a little bed of water. I was watching all of these arthropods and filter feeders that had made their home in the mat, and I was watching them kind of crawling around and doing their own thing. My interest in the invasive species actually began with a forest ecology, but I am also an avid reader. And it was when I read this book, Lake Invaders by William Rapai, that I began studying marine invaders. This book really opened my eyes to kind of the problem of marine invaders in the Great Lakes, which is, we'll come back to that in a few minutes. After I read the book, not right after, it took me a while, but I made this piece. This piece is called Filter, and it addresses the zebra and the quagga mussels that have invaded the Great Lakes and beyond. And if you're paying attention, in my installation, you will see the zebra mussel, which is invasive to the Chickamauga River Basin. But these two mussels are filter feeding organisms which have had catastrophic impacts in the ecosystems in which they have established. Quagga mussels are indigenous to parts of Ukraine, and zebra mussels are indigenous to both Ukraine and Russia, and both are assumed to have been introduced by ballast water. They have multiple ecological impacts. First of all, they clog, as you can see, they clog things. They clog water intake structures and they accumulate on docks, buoys, and bolt holes. So there is an economic cost to many invasives, this one included. Additionally, beaches have become heavily encrusted, and so it's hard to walk on the beach barefoot anymore. You can cut your foot. They often also encrust the bottom of lakes, which displace the native aquatic arthropods, which want kind of soft sediment for burrowing. And they're very prolific. A fully mature female mussel is capable of producing up to 1 million eggs per year. So the piece, Filter, actually doesn't feature the mussels because I kind of wanted to lure people in. It actually features the diatoms and algae that are native to the Great Lakes, which is their food source. And these mussels are hungry, y'all. They basically outcompete all the native freshwater mussels, which kind of inexorably destroys the food chain in the Great Lakes. In my work, as you've seen from one other piece, it's really important for me to embed some of the science because I learn a lot, I research a lot, and I want to tell people about that. And so the white printing here varies from piece to piece, but this white printing actually describes the life cycle of the two different mussels, which is very similar. My recent work also acknowledges the special conundrum that marine invasives pose. So when we're walking around outside, terrestrial organisms are hard to ignore, right? You can look out the window and you can see an empress tree, a paulownia tree. We can see things. We can see vines. We can see mammals if there are pigs on your land. You know that. And they're hard to eradicate, but it's possible, right? But just ponder for a minute. There's stuff swimming out there, and we don't even know it's there. We can't see it, and we're still wanting to somehow control it, and it becomes really, really difficult. This piece is Trophic Cascade. I was speaking to someone earlier about the installation at the Church and Center. This was it. This installation features a collection of 182 marine organisms from saltwater and freshwater environments. It is a collection of vertebrates, invertebrates, and marine vegetation that collectively contribute to the disruption of ecosystems around the globe. The trophic level of an organism refers to the position it occupies in the food web. Trophic cascade is a term that is applied to the food web of ecosystems when they are experiencing disruption. It is an ecological phenomenon triggered by the addition or removal of top predators that cause ripple effects, potentially devastating the food chain. And you think back to the diatoms, like those are predators. They eat diatoms. Something else eats the diatoms that was supposed to be there. So this is the idea of a trophic cascade. It's a ripple effect. In the case of marine bioinvaders, the cascade effect is really quite pronounced as aquatic ecosystems often find themselves under threat from more than one invader, and we're not always witness to these when they're starting to happen. There are many recognized vectors for marine bioinvasions, and they include ballast water, commercial and recreational boating, aquaculture, commercial fishing, the aquarium trade, and rafting. all of which are either a direct result of human activity or exacerbated by it. And I'm going to start with ballast water because ballast water is an enormous factor, has been for many years. A lot can live in it. So ballast water is the water that ships take on to balance their loads. You think a big ship's coming over from China and they've got to get water in there. So they suck in a bunch of water over in China and then they float it across the ocean. And it has all sorts of stuff in it. It has zooplankton, phytoplankton, has small fish, jellyfish, all kinds of weird stuff in there. And it's sloshing around and it can live quite happily in there for some amount of time until they get to, let's say, Los Angeles, and they off put their load and they then need to discharge that ballast water. And that's what was happening for many years. My friends at the Marine Bioinvasions Lab have been integral in doing research that has helped create legislation where ballast water protocols have changed. But it's been a major factor in the spread of marine bioinvaders. And you're thinking, okay, well, this is the ocean. But I ask you to consider for a minute the Erie Canal. And this connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes. This canal, for many years, was a superhighway for organisms that have invaded our inland freshwater lakes and rivers because they would come through. They would do that. Rafting occurs when debris or plastic is introduced into the water and species hitch a ride on it. As you can see up in the upper right, this is debris from the Japanese tsunami. So it's not always deliberate, right? Sometimes plastic just ends up in the ocean, like the Pacific Gyre that has a ton of plastic. In the left-hand side, you see a striped beakfish, which is swimming in a water-filled box aboard a Japanese boat that washed ashore in Washington State. We're only looking at one, but there were actually 5 of them that survived. And y'all probably know it only takes 2 to tango. In this picture, you can see some of the effects of recreational boating, right? And so all of us know that if you leave your boat in the water, anybody that owns a boat knows that if you leave your boat in the water, it's going to get dirty and then stuff might grow on it. That's called biofouling. And in the upper one, that's probably the quagga or the zebra mussel that has encrusted that. All they need is another dip in the water, y'all. They can actually survive quite a while in there. They take it to another lake, and there they go. In the lower left, there's a seaweed. It looks suspiciously like hydrilla, which is featured in my installation. And again, all it takes is for some of these is just a little fragment, and then there we go. And on the right, there's my buddy, the lionfish. The aquarium trade is interesting because it's not just animals that get released, but sometimes they have native seaweeds that they're selling with the animals. And so people that are like, well, I can't take care of this, I'm moving, they dump it out. And they're like, well, this would be the best life for it. Well, maybe it's going to be a good life for that. But then, you've got hydrilla or parrot feather floating around along with Mr. Lionfish. This work, which is in the Lee East Lounge, is site-specific in 2 ways. First of all, I created it specifically for the Hunter Museum, specifically for this space, and it investigates several environmental impacts on the Tennessee River, which the lounge overlooks. The piece features creatures that are both native and invasive to the Tennessee River, as well as surrounding creeks and streams. So there's a few of these in here that aren't in the Tennessee River because, y'all, hellbender, I had to put it in there. It's close by. I'm a trout fisherman and I wanted that in there, so it's in there. There's a few other ones that are more creek fish and not river fish, but some of these freshwater invaders are still affecting the streams that they're in. The native species are featured in blues and greens, and the invasive species are featured in red and orange. The creatures are arranged so that they flow through the space, interacting with one another in different groupings that kind of imply, what I was trying to do is imply the disruption that the invasive creatures can cause. Though the focus of the piece is certainly on invasive species, the piece actually responds to 4 different environmental pressures on the Tennessee River. These are represented through patterns that are printed on each of the animals. The native organisms, which you can see on the right, were printed with patterns that respond to these environmental pressures the river experiences. And the invasive species feature a different pattern that points to their global origin. My first step in creating this piece was to actually come here. So that was my first step. But my next step was to do a little research. And I was connected with Dr. Anna George, a biologist from the Tennessee Aquarium just down the street, who reminded me of just how many dams there are in the Tennessee River. And I kind of knew it, but I kind of didn't. These dams, put in place by the Tennessee Valley Authority, provide much needed energy to local communities. They are really have been a good thing in the community. But they also convert what would normally be a river ecosystem to a series of lakes, disrupting the normal habitat a river ecosystem would provide, as the water simply does not move the same way in a lake as it would in a river. Another pressure that we're seeing on salt and freshwater environments is microplastics. We're really kind of just starting to see the research into this issue, but it is nonetheless a factor affecting many, many water bodies. These are plastics that have entered the water and have broken down to less than 5 millimeters, which is very tiny. And those are ingested by fish and other wildlife. And at this point, wildlife exposure in wildlife and humans, of course, is acknowledged, but the full impacts are unknown. Like, we read about it, right? The last one that the last one that's not invasive species is sedimentation and pollution. Land use policies, excuse me, can result, of course, into sediment. And these are loose particles of silt, sand, and clay that are deposited into the freshwater bodies where it doesn't belong, which causes poor visibility in cloudy water, all of which can harm underwater organisms. Another factor in sedimentation that I have witnessed personally is climate change, which is causing increasingly catastrophic storms. Many of us in Western North Carolina, after Helene, were left wondering, my mom said it, what are we going to do with all this mud? It's still there. This is the last thing that, of course, I feature the invasive species. And this is one that's in there. This is one of the Asian carp. There's 4 species of them. There's the big head, the silver, the grass, and the black carp. Some of these, y'all, were actually introduced to control algae. So people put them in there like, y'all eat that stuff. Don't bother anything else, but just do your thing. Um, so this is actually, in this picture, this is the silver carp. And the silver carp is famous for getting very agitated when boats run over where they are. And there are many, many stories about boaters getting hit in the head or anything by these, which kind of sounds funny. You're like, oh, ha, ha, ha. Until you realize they're really big. They're very, very large fish. There have been some great ways to combat them using electric shock, and that has been decently effective, but it's very localized. So my piece really does not, please don't think that it represents a full inventory of either native or invasive species, because there is only so much time in the day. There are way more than this. But I did try to balance each group with a range of organisms. So in each one, you'll see some vertebrates, you'll see some invertebrates and botanical species. I did have some insects in the natives. So there is a stick bug in there somewhere. Featured in the middle of this grouping is Myriophyllum spicatum, or Eurasian water milfoil. And it's that beautiful little lacy one that is exceptionally hard to draw, by the way, but it's very pretty. Water milfoil, Eurasian water milfoil, as the name implies, is native to Europe, Asia, and North Africa. And this is one species that may have been introduced via the aquarium trade, but it's hard to be sure. This plant reproduces primarily through fragmentation, and I know at least one person in the audience knows what that means, because they've tried to combat something like this in a lake. So fragmentation means that one small stem fragment, like that little thing, that beautiful thing there on the right, can break off, sink to the bottom, and that's a whole new plant. It also flowers, which I did not know. And once it flowers, it puts out these seeds. And once the seeds are fertilized, those can sink to the bottom. And that's not as kind of a rabid way of spreading. But once they sink to the bottom, they can remain viable for years. This makes water milfoil exceptionally hard to manage. As simply pulling, it's kind of off the table, since fragments are sure to break off and become new plants. It's notable that this grass doesn't do well in strong waves and currents, which points back to the influence of dams on the Tennessee River, which have definitely changed the flow. I'm not trying to critique the Tennessee Valley Authority. I think they're doing a good job, but it's a thing. Obviously, it forms these thick mats, and it spreads really quickly, and it blocks all the sunlight. And so not only does it threaten the diversity and abundance of native plants and ecological balance, but it also affects recreational opportunities. Now, this next one is both the prettiest one in the exhibition, in my opinion, and the ugliest one. You're like, wait a minute. It's the one on the right that looks a lot like a diatom because that's what it is. It reproduces, it's called Dynamo. Its Latin name is Gomphonemma geminate, and it's sometimes called a nuisance freshwater alga. It has this funny, coarse, woolly texture. In most circles, though, especially here, it's called a highly invasive species of freshwater diatom. It is actually native to northern North America. And its introduction pathway is suspected to be fishing gear, especially felt-soled wading boots, which have mostly been phased out. And I makes me realize now why I have a rubber pair of wading boots. That's why. This thing reproduces asexually. It forms stalks that allow it to attach to rocks, plants, and other submerged surfaces. And it's commonly known as rock snot because it forms these extensive mats in rivers, lakes, and streams, which can completely smother stream beds. Obviously, this affects food sources, but in the understatement of the year, it also makes recreational activities unpleasant. The buildup is not the cells themselves, but the massive production of extracellular stalks. So, as mentioned before, I am primarily a printmaker, and I typically make works on paper along with very large installations. But the spaces here at the Hunter didn't quite invite that, so I had to work out a new approach. And so one of the questions I get a lot is, how did you make that? What is that? So tell you a little bit about how I made it. First step was to research and collect images of each of the organisms. So for this step, I used multiple websites and several books to ensure that these creatures were in fact native or invasive to the Chickamauga River Basin area. I found a book on mussels in Tennessee, and y'all have a lot of native mussels here, several of which have already been extirpated. So that was interesting. But once these organisms were in place, I drew each of these individually on my iPad. So this is some of the drawings. I created vector files for each one, and then I created compilations that I then sent to my vinyl cutter. Once they were cut, I printed the patterns using photo screen print stencils. In this image on the right, you can see the vinyl cutter in action. It's very loud. Be thankful you can't hear it. And on the left, you can see some of the invasive species after being printed. And I started with the invasives. And so this was actually a way to test my color scheme. I had ordered my vinyl and was like, are these gonna work? And ended up ordering 1 or 2 more colors after this. The invasive species were all printed with the same pattern, and it's a little harder to see in this image. But this pattern represents the global nature of the problem of invasive species. It is a map of global trade routes. And so it refers really to how some of them actually began through shipping channels via ballast water, but also just this idea of exchanging, right? This idea of we're always looking for things outside and bringing things back. Um, in terms of the native species, they were printed with 3 different patterns that refer respectively to sediment, microplastics, and some of the dams affecting the Tennessee River. And I say some because I thought I had them all, but I guess I missed one. These are 2 photopositives. The one on the left represents sedimentation, and I just started freehanding that one day. And the one on the right is one of the dams on the Tennessee River. You can see I'm starting to draw that for the photo screen print stencil. And this is an image of all the dams. And I found plans for the dams, which is a little disturbing. You can find these on Google. You can find these. Um, There are 9 of them, and apparently I only located 8. 6 of them are actually in Tennessee, and several of them are not in Tennessee, but on the Tennessee River. So 8 of them actually appear in this installation. Dams are really kind of interesting to draw, y'all. There's lots of little parts in there. This is an image of me after I've just screen printed some of the microplastics pattern, and I've flood coated my screen. And this is an image of the screen prints drying. So after the screen prints dried, the next step was weeding the vinyl, which is where you take all the excess vinyl away. and there was a lot of weeding to be done. So I had weeding parties with some of my friends and some of my former students who had graduated and owed me favors. And we had weeding pile contests. So this was one night where my pile got so large it fell over. I won that night. Um, and the final step in the installation, which you can see in a beautiful document that is in there, was the actual installing of it. And that is me drawing in space with the organisms. And I came through with blue tape and I mapped it out, kind of, sort of, is how I always do it. Curators are fascinated and a little freaked out. And I mapped it out and I was like, okay. And I started putting up the organisms. And then basically the whole crew came through and we put it up together. And so it was all hands on deck. Um, and now for something completely different, because there's a whole nother one we got to talk about. So, in the southeastern corner of Tennessee, where it meets North Carolina and Georgia, there's a magical place called Campbell Cove Lake, that you know gives me both of my things. Because I love water, I've told you that, but I also have a true affinity for forest ecology. In fact, my interest in invasive species as a whole started with long walks in the woods, where I was like, "Oh, what is that? What is that? What is that?" This picture is taken by photographer Sarah Allman, and it's taken from a ridge on the land that I co-own with my brother and my mother. And when I was invited to consider the possibility of an exhibition in the stairwell, my mind immediately flew to the fact that I am a proud Tennessee landowner, and this is our land. And I've walked it so many times that I've become familiar with it. And in this shot, you can really see you can see a little bit of the history of it, right? You see the beautiful lake and the fog in the background, and it's a great job photographing that. But there's also an abundance of small trees, and perhaps you're noticing that. This is all young trees, right? This land had most certainly been logged and probably damaged by the copper mine that's not too far away before we got a hold of it. So you can see all these young trees. But once upon a time, this land might have had trees like this. Eastern forests would have had big towering trees, big towering American chestnut trees numbering in the millions. American chestnuts were among the largest, tallest, and fastest growing trees in these forests, in these parts. They've provided incredible habitat for nearly every level of the food chain. The chestnuts themselves were dense with calories and rich in vitamin C, and they were used by both people and as feed for livestock. The lumber was also incredibly popular as it was rot resistant and very straight grain. And so, being incredibly durable, this was the preferred lumber for everything from log cabins to baby cribs to telephone poles and coffins. It's estimated that in some forests, 1 out of every 4 hardwoods was an American chestnut. And the gathering of the chestnuts coincided with the holiday season, of course, and these were so ubiquitous that there's a line in a popular Christmas song about them: chestnuts roasting on an open fire. Don't hang on to that because it'll get stuck in your head. Sorry. Look at this. This is a chestnut tree on our land. This is my chestnut tree. This is the tree that I visit every time I go, and it's really the inspiration for the piece in the stairwell. When I go, I hike up to this ridge, and I talk to it. I've babied it, and it's hard to see. I'm sorry, it's not a better shot because I was taking it with my phone. I didn't know I was taking it for this talk, or would have taken a better shot. But this tree clearly has a chestnut blight, and you can see where we babied it some. We've cut one of the other stump sprouts down behind it. But this installation features leaves and fruit from the American chestnut tree, which was decimated by the chestnut blight. The chestnut blight is caused by an organism called Cryphonectria parasitica. And this is a picture of the chestnut blight life cycle, which is honestly pretty complicated. It is a pathogenic fungus that is native to East and Southeast Asia. So it did belong somewhere before it came here. And it was introduced to the US, kind of in the northern US, sometime around the 1800s. And in the span of 50 years, all of the American chestnut trees in the eastern forest were functionally gone. It causes cankers that basically girdle the tree and block the transport of water and nutrients, leading to tree death in anywhere from 1 to 3 years. And affected trees have these identifiable markers that show kind of where they're at with the disease. So on the left, you can see it starts with this kind of funny orange area, which over time transitions to these large oblong cankers. And then after some time, and that one actually had it too, but after some time, the fungus produces these little orange spore bearing structures on the canker. And then when you get really close to it, you see these little things. These are they're beautiful, aren't they? I thought so too. They're in my prints. These long tendrils are called conidia, and they form after rainstorms, which allows the fungal spores to be distributed by wind and rain. And so, stored in these beautiful little structures are all the information and machinery that was needed to wipe out one of the most vibrant tree species in North America. Like every other installation I had to put some of the science in. It was harder because these leaves are really big. Y'all seen them. So my screens are 25 by 36, and these leaves were bigger than that. So I actually had to design this pattern in a repeating pattern. And so I could repeat it up, down, and sideways to get it to print on these large leaves. So I'd have to print it, let it dry, match it up, print it again, let it dry. And this is the Parathecia part of the life cycle. Let's go back to my chestnut tree for a minute. So we think of this tree as being extinct, but it's actually not. So the tree is actually still living quite happily underground, and I met a wonderful man who is going to take me on a hike later this year to see another one that is living, right? The roots of the tree are blight resistant. So many of the old trees are putting up stump sprouts, and the stump sprouts come up, and before they reach maturity, they mostly die. Some of them, which is unusual but not unheard of, can produce fruiting bodies. In this image, and it's hard to see here, but I could really see it on my computer screen, I could see that circle represents how big the stump was. So really, even though it's a new tree, it's a really old tree too. And there are people that feel differently than me, but I feel like this is a story that has a great deal of hope. Several organizations are actually working to restore the tree. And the goal of the American Chestnut Foundation is to develop a blight-resistant version of the tree and to restore it to its native range across the eastern U.S. And you might think we were having this discussion in the donor circle, and you might think, well, you should be against that. That's not pure. I don't think that we're ever going back to any kind of pure landscape. Like, that's not our fate. But we can, I feel like, do some remediation. And so I want this tree to make it. My tree actually produces fruit, and so, I'll talk to it. If you have any name suggestions, I couldn't come up with a good one for this talk, but I'm open. Chester, nice. I like it. So, the term witness tree is assigned to trees that were present during historical or cultural events of America, and these trees get their names from being able to witness a historically significant event. And this piece is so named because these trees have collectively witnessed their destruction and hopefully will witness their rebirth. There is a printed series that accompanies this installation, and this really juxtaposes the anatomy of the fungus along with healthy tree elements. And it's with an eye towards coexistence that I did this. You can see the conidia form here. So the blight is here and shows no sign of abating, but still the trees persist. This series of unique prints, so there's no other prints that look like this in the world, use these elements in an improvisational manner, hopefully creating a roadmap of how these two organisms can eventually live in harmony. And as I'm kind of wrapping up, I want to point something out that's really important. Oop, we're getting to him. We'll get there. Invasive species aren't inherently bad. They're not evil. They're not immoral. I can appreciate the beauty even in that fungus, right? I mean, it's a fungus. Like, most people are like, really? But that conidia is really beautiful. I put it in these and it's beautiful. Um, they're really just doing their thing. They just happen to be doing it in a place where they don't belong. Take this happy little fella. This is the blue catfish. This is native to y'all's river, and fishermen love it. Check out this guy. He was having a really good day. Yeah, I mean, I love to fish. But this fish has actually been moved to the Chesapeake Bay. And so I have some friends who have done work about this fish because it is decimating some of the populations of other things in the Chesapeake Bay. And so you may ask, what can I do, right? And I think that if each of us ask ourselves that and do one small thing, it's really a huge gesture. First of all, if you're a landowner, plant native species. There are so many garden centers that have really bought into that, and you have to do a little research. Don't go to Lowe's Hardware because they're definitely not doing it. But if you do a little research in your area, you can start to find them. There's Prairie Moon that does a great job. There's also some others in my area that do a great job, but I have to be careful about what I buy because I'm in a very specific region. Also, y'all, if you have a lionfish, please don't release that thing in the wild. If you have a pet, figure out something else to do with it rather than putting it in the environment. And if, like me, you like to fish, just clean your fishing gear and your boats when you're moving from one body of water to the next. Also, here's a list of really great organizations, some of which are local to you, that are doing some incredible work on these issues. And so the biggest thing I think we can all do is educate ourselves. Learn. Go to these sites and learn about it. So certainly go to the aquarium because that's such an amazing resource. And that's all I have for y'all. Do you have any questions? Yes, sir.
So, of course, my classmates are sometimes really big idiots. A lot of them are. And whenever we're at fitness, because we don't have enough money for a real gym, so we go outside, we usually have free play at this thing called the outdoor classroom. And when I saw like those little spiky things from the chestnut trees, there's a lot of those at our school.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm going to have to go check that out, buddy. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm trying to get an impression from your remarks whether you're optimistic or pessimistic regarding the future of those topics with which you've dealt.
It has been hard to maintain optimism since the storm hit Western North Carolina. I won't lie. Friends of mine lost everything. People right up the road from me died. So I do feel like there's still beauty in the world, though. Despite we're facing some things, we are. But I feel optimistic because I think there's no other choice for me. I still make this work because I think if I wasn't somewhere in my soul optimistic, I wouldn't be making this. I do feel like there is a chance for us to turn things around. I don't think we'll go back to a pure landscape, but I do think that if we are a little more conscious of how we're working things, that we could make some changes. So, does that answer it?
It does.
Yes.
You put obviously so much time and research into an installation that speaks to the place where you are installing it. And I'm curious because I unfortunately don't know your background. I haven't followed you until today. So I'm curious where else you have done installations to this kind of level of intimacy with the place.
That's a great question. Actually, I think, for a long time, I was just working really generally, invasive species, that's gonna be my thing for a while. And then I actually had an opportunity to have an installation at Kennesaw, Georgia, and that was the first one. The person that provided that opportunity is here tonight. That was the first one that I really was like, I'm gonna respond to this place. Because I think that, it speaks to us as humans. If we can do that. The marine bioinvasives, the big installation was actually a collaboration. It stemmed off of a collaboration with the Marine Bioinvasions Lab from the Smithsonian Research Center. So that's not site specific. That piece was actually in Boone because they had a big enough space for it. But there is another one of those. It's a version of it in vinyl in downtown Baltimore. near the aquarium and near where they're doing some of that work. But I'm always interested, you know. I think place is really important. It also gives me a chance to go like poke things with a stick.
Right. Really resonant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's one back there, and then I'll come back to you. Yes.
I think this message is very important to spread, and I think your installation is stunning and engaging. The detail that you've created, I think it's really beautiful, very compelling. My question is, how do you process your waste products and the vinyl when you're done with your installation?
Oh, I was so hoping no one would ask that. I mean, it goes in the trash for sure. I mean, I think I've grappled with that, and I think every artist who has a conscience has grappled with that. Like, what's my contribution? And in fact, the quality enhancement plan at my university has to do with climate change. And I went to a workshop, and they asked, like, what is your discipline's contribution to this? And I was like, well, we're artists. And I was like, wait a minute, we're artists. We have a lot of waste. I don't think we have any more or less than any other people. I mean, it just is a thing. You know, every industry has its waste products. I think that we collectively as a society have to really come together and figure out how to grapple with that. But it's a great question, and I don't have a great answer for it.
My son is an App State grad, and I had him come look at this with me. He's all about water and sustainability.
Oh, nice.
So, I mean, you are providing a very educational experience and getting the message out. But when I threw his graduation party, I wasn't gonna have any plastic products because he would not approve of that. It was a challenge.
Yeah, it is. And I will say, like, I do take great pains in my own life. Like, we use a lot of reusable water bottles. Like, I'm that person that holds up the grocery line every Sunday. I have my bags, and I like to bag my own groceries, and like, I'm that person. And so we do a lot of things that, you know, hopefully offset our footprint, but none of us is perfect. None of us. So, any more questions? Yes.
It's not really a question. I just want to thank you for inspiring me with all these questions. This whole native plant thing is something, as a child from the 50s, we just had green grass and chemistry and all that. My oldest son's a landscape architect, and he's always teaching me about the native and how important it is. So I think this kind of raising of awareness is so important for us to live in harmony with our environment. Doing the best we can as far as recycling and whatever. So I did appreciate the fact that you gave me a lot of food for thought.
Sure. And I will say, Valerie, that we bought a house a few years ago, and I've taken a lot of trouble to plant a lot of natives. It's not cheap, and it's not easy, because some of them are very peculiar and have these like little things that they want particularly. But it's like, my mom bought a house recently. I was trying to help her strategize some things, and I was like, think of it as like a 5-year plan, you know? Like in a year, that thing will bloom, and in 2 years, all of those things will bloom, and then you'll get started on this other thing. And it's really amazing, since I planted all that stuff, how much the butterfly and insect population has gone up. Like, I have a section of the summer where it's just like butterflies are everywhere. And it's so beautiful.
Yeah,
And I even had a monarch.
We have to worry about deer resistance and other things, but it's a worthy challenge to take
Yeah,
on, you know.
absolutely. Well, thank y'all. If you're too shy to ask, I'll be here for a minute.